So, Jason, you and I, of course, have been tracking the progression of deadlines and guidelines around migration to PQC, and very visible in all of that discussion has been NIST's throwing down the gauntlet to say that 2030, August 2030 to be specific, is the time when we need to have been migrated to PQC. Um, but there was a very interesting, let's say, proclamation from Google very recently, March 25th, 2026. There's a blog post from the Google VP of Security Engineering, Heather Adkins, and it reads Quantum Frontiers, actually two people, that and Sophia Schmeig, who's the senior staff cryptography engineer, and it reads Quantum Frontiers may be closer than they appear. What does this post say, Jay?
Tim, I think that Google, who they've got a big advantage compared to a lot of other folks because they actually do operate a quantum computer building program. And I think that they're really on the cusp of seeing what error handling and a lot of the other things that have been going on with the advent of fully gated quantum computer engineering. And I think that they're looking at that. If you really just back up, they're looking at all that and saying, wow, between the techniques of the stabilization of the qubits, the which is basically all about the error handling, the number of qubits that will be necessary to actually operationalize Shor's algorithm. And that's a whole lot of gobbledygook words that basically mean your current cryptography is kaput. I think that all together is making them say, we did a pretty good job of deciding on 2030, but we might have something that's usable, perhaps even a little bit before that.
Yeah, and ultimately, right, what they come out with is they've thrown out 2029. So that is, for all intents and purposes, a year earlier than what NIST was calling for. I have noticed that the NIST deadline in a lot of people's discussion has been, the granularity has been reduced to sometime in 2030, which is giving everybody until December 31st. By that line of reasoning, this Google deadline, which they just say 2029, is bringing it in a year, right? Because even if we think it's December 2029, and you might say a year's not all that much. Well, it's 2026. A year is 25% of the time you have to migrate. So by that line of reasoning, it's actually an awful lot. And yeah, like you said, the gist of this communication is, listen, we don't have the time. We just don't.
Tim, I'm going to add a little bit to that, which is I'm at this point not super interested in a particular, like, is it going to be Canada Day 2029? I don't care. I really like that the specific date is less interesting to me than the fact that I don't think Google is telling you, all of you enterprise IT people who might be listening to this podcast, I don't think Google's saying to you, you got to wrap up shop by mid 2029. I don't think that's what they're saying to you. I think what they absolutely are saying to you is two things, which is, number one, Google as a company is aspiring to be prepared within 2029 or by 2029. And I think that they're also saying, perhaps so should you, but I don't think they're not prescribing that. They're saying everything that they're deciding, including, Tim, Merkle tree certificates, something that a hot topic that we're going to be covering shortly.
We will be.
Again, because Google is now taking that in and accepting it as part of the Chrome program. And so what Google is really saying here is they're making all the strides necessary to be prepared in 2029.
I don't disagree with that, Jay. I think though there's a nuance to this that we don't want to ignore, which is there's this undertone to what Google's saying is, and we're doing this, not because we're keen on being the first ones to be done. We're doing this because we feel it is necessary. And so
They're
then by
not, yeah.
that you can extrapolate that it's necessary for others as well.
Look, there's guidance that says, out of the UK that's saying, 2035 and beyond, we'll start to think about guys. Uh, Google is showing you what the real time frame is for them,
Right.
and I think we should all listen very carefully to them. I absolutely think you're right, Tim. The undertone here is that, it's amazing. You and I, for 6 years, Tim, had talking about this theoretically,
Yeah.
and it's starting to become an awful lot less theoretical. It sure feels that way, doesn't it?
Well, and if you think about it, we got the NIST round one champions, if you will, in 2024, right? Almost 2 years ago. And at the time, you might have said, oh, well, 2030, that gives us 6 years. That feels like a lot of time. Well, a third of that is gone. A third of that is gone. And it feels like we did not make a third of the progress that needed to be made in that time
No,
period.
no.
And so, certainly we can have all kinds of, you know, uh, 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 detailed debates about whether those dates are right or wrong and exactly when you need it and don't. And, I'm of the opinion that it's not actually one hard date. It's a bunch of hard dates depending on the use case and what's going on. And, I'm of the opinion that we can always we for many things are already late because of the harvest and decrypt problem, which is just plain has been a problem for years. And so when you look at it that way, a single date like this is only part of the story. Nonetheless, if you are going to collapse on a date and say this is the date that's important and this is the date we want to focus on, I will go back to saying we've spent a third of that time and we have not covered a third of the ground at all.
I'm going to say something in defense of the folks that are listening to this, saying, "Geez, I want to move, and I haven't moved much for that third of the time. So what now?" Um, everybody's waiting. Yes, absolutely. The standards are available to us, but authentication mechanisms are not. We've definitely moved mountains in the large vendor community with regards to chems, but for the DSA part of the world, which we always knew would be in the middle and last in
Yeah.
terms of this journey,
And the
um,
hardest part.
it, what is available to you right now? Yes, I can spit out MLDSA all day long out of OpenSSL experimentation. So can you. You can come to Sectigo Quantum Labs and spit out MLDSA as well. No sweat. We can do that for you. What are you going to do with that cert? As Nick France, one of our colleagues, says, the authentication mechanisms simply don't exist. The signing mechanisms don't really exist.
Yeah.
What do you do? And so I think that I think the finger pointing right now is not going to be at the general IT person who's trying to figure out their budget. What would they even spend their money on if they had budget?
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
my issue.
You can't actually implement these things right now. There's no standards. There's no consistent like even if somebody went and created a PKI that used these standards, it wouldn't work with any of the other software that you have to use. The only way that we even see use of ML Chem broadly the way we do is they're being used by technically astute organizations that are used to developing their own software, that literally develop their own software. We're talking about Google, Cloudflare, Apple, people like that, that are software development firms. And so it's very different for them than it is for any bank that is not actually, or bank or enterprise that is not actually building its own tech from the ground up, when that has to use off the shelf technology. And for those groups, you can implement it today.
Tim, I'm thinking about the companies you just mentioned. Cloudflare has guys like Boss Westerbaum. Google's got Sophie Schmeg. Like, you're talking about some of the smartest people that exist in the world on these topics. That those people, like, there's less than a handful of people like that can confidently implement a chem, make it work for, at extreme scale. The types of things that the average enterprise, who has a lot of smart people of their own, there's nothing for those smart people to work with right now. There's just absolutely nothing. And that's the part of it that's starting to make me itch a little bit at the moment. There's so much work. We really do have to have Sophia Selly on soon to talk about what's going on over at IETF. We've got to probably have Dr. Dustin Moody back on to talk about some other topics that are going on.
Let's get Boss back while we're at it.
Let's get Boss back on. There's just so much. There's so much that has been happening, and I think part of what we're going to have to return back to this community who listens to this podcast, Tim, is how do we start making this real?
Yeah,
that's going to be a big topic for us soon.
Yeah, and I think if there's a takeaway from the Google 2029 timeline, and whether or not we feel that it's going to apply to all of us individually, is that as you said, this is probably the one company that has access to more information about this topic than any other company in the world. And this think tank of people inside of Google have definitely come to the conclusion as a group that the public timelines are not going to do the job. And we just ignore that fact at your own peril, I think, is my point.
I think that is the point of the podcast today, Tim, is that blog that just came out from Google, which, I'm really glad it did get some traction in the news. It did get some traction in places like LinkedIn. People are chattering about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But there's a lot of questions to be asked yet. It's getting closer and closer and closer, Tim.
All right. Well, sorry to end on a downer, but let's end on a downer. Thank you very much, Jay.
Thanks, Tim.
Okay. Let's do one of our science.